Let's play e4. Oh, it's a rematch? Okay. Okay, guys, I'll play the King's Gambit. A lot of people have been requesting this. I will play King's Gambit. I don't know it very well. I've never played the King's Gambit as my full-time opening. Of course, I know a good amount, but don't expect like top-line theory. Thank you, Chupacabras UCSD. Okay, so first of all, the first misconception about the King's Gambit is that white plays d4. White does not play d4. And the reason that d4 immediately is a bad move is that black has a super nasty check on h4. That actually forces white's king out because you can't play g3 due to f takes g3. So you actually have to develop your knight first. Well, you don't have to. That's not the only move, but it's considered the most reputable because you stop queen h4. Now, there are several possibilities. Now it's time to go d4. And d6 is possible. So now we're threatening to win back the pawn. If black allows us, yeah, so g5 is the move. Black clings to the pawn, and these pawns can potentially combine to storm white's kingside. And I will play, if he does play g4, I'm going to play a really interesting gambit. Now, we need to develop our pieces fast. One of the rules for gambits, so h4 I think is a move, but let's play this in more romantic style. One of the sort of bottom, h4 is apparently the theoretical move, but I'm going to play a variation of the moves. I'm just going to develop my bishop. One of the rules for playing gambits is that you need to develop fast and you need to develop actively, and you should never be afraid to sacrifice more material. That's what makes gambits fun. If you sacrifice a pawn, that means you've almost made this contract, right, where, okay, I'm going for the initiative. You can't be stingy with the rest of your material. That would be kind of hypocritical if you're playing a gambit. So we're going to play bishop c4. And that bishop aims itself at the pawn. We now have two pieces developed and black has 0. A lot of you guys are also noticing the move h4, which is a very typical move in general. It undermines the pawn chain. We're going after the base of the pawn chain. We're trying to soften up that f4 pawn. So that's in our pocket. Let's see what Will does, and we might play this move against certain responses, or we might just continue our development by castling. Okay. Well, yeah. Okay, bishop e6. Now that move is, I'm not familiar with it, and I think I know why it's inaccurate. So we need to, of course, decide whether we trade. Now, if you play gambits, then listen up because this is important. When people play gambits, a common type of mistake that I see is that they will become completely allergic to any kind of trades. There will be this thought that if you play a gambit, that means every single trade, by definition, is good for your opponent. So they will avoid every trade. They'll go like d5 in this position, or they'll move the bishop back. Now, that is not quite true. It might be the case that a queen trade is bad, but that doesn't mean a single minor piece trade is going to somehow cause the gambit to lose its potency. In fact, that is the opposite here. If we take the bishop, black has to take with a pawn, and that really weakens that king. It opens up this diagonal. And we're absolutely going to do that. If we can follow up correctly, this is going to be squarely in white's favor. Thank you, JTS Returns. So what move should we now play? This is a move I've already referenced, so you guys should now see that it is very, very strong. What else should we notice about this? The pawn on e6 is undefended. It's undefended, which means that we can basically set up a fork here, or a double attack. And the move is h4. If g4, then knight to g5. And in contrast to the previous instance, the knight is also attacking e6. So we are attacking 2 of black's pawns, 3 of black's pawns, f4, g4, and e6. Black's position basically falls apart right off the bat. Bishop h6 is an understandable move, but still, black is not holding this together very well. Okay, now we have a cool idea. The obvious move is h takes g5, which breaks up black's pawn chain. It forces the bishop on an awkward square. That is not, I believe, the best idea. Who can spot a cool little alternative? Yes, we can go knight takes g5, and if bishop takes g5, we have an intermediate move, queen h5. How do I see this? Well, as I've pointed out, if you've noticed that the diagonal has been weakened, then you should be automatically searching for ways to get the knight off of f3 in a good way, and then put the queen on h5. This should not be like, oh my god, I didn't realize this was a thing. You should absolutely realize that it's a thing after black plays fe. Okay, so queen h5 check forces the king out. Then we win back the bishop. Okay, king f8 is probably not great because king d7, king c8, maybe evacuating the king was better, although that's still bad. Now f4 is hanging. The f file will open up, and that'll be a disaster. No, this is just very, very bad for Will. If we play accurately, I think white should be close to winning here. So we have a couple of moves on tap here. First of all, g6. Yeah, g6 seems very, very strong. Potentially because it attacks h7. And he's played e5. So how should we play this? What we can try to do here, we can take on so first of all, let's take on e5. Because opening up the position is clearly in our favor. It's clearly in our favor. And also it softens up the e5 pawn. Now after he takes back, that pawn is going to be undefended. Now I think we have a really nice move, which I just mentioned. What am I talking about here? So the move is, drumroll please, g6. Okay, so it does a couple of things. It opens up the attack on e5. It attacks h7. And we further soften up his king side. Now, there were alternatives. We could have gone simply knight c3. We could have maybe put the bishop on a3. But how can I resist such a move? How can I resist such a tempting move? Thank you, Mick Analice. Appreciate the 2 months. And black can defend here. I think Will can maybe survive if he plays very accurately. But such positions are very, very hard to defend. So this is, yeah, that's why the King's Gambit is such a fun opening. When it goes well, you can play some really nice attacking games in the King's Gambit. And if black doesn't know how to respond, then it's also very hard to play off the cuff. Can't he take your rook and attack your king? Well, he can't. I mean, maybe you mean take here, but then the rook drops on h8. It's undefended. Yeah. It's not quite GG yet. I think I see a good move for black. But I'm not actually sure what exactly black can do to defend. Because we're attacking so many things at once. And I was hoping he would play something like this because we have a really, really pretty move. Now, a lot of people would grab on h7 immediately, but that's less good than it seems because he can just move the knight out. But as a lot of you guys are already pointing out, when there is a pawn on g6, at least with 2% of your brain, you should be thinking, man, I'm pretty close to promoting this pawn. I'm pretty darn close to promoting this pawn. Now, first of all, queen f5 check, he doesn't have to go to king g7. He can cover that check with queen f6. We're pretty close to promoting the pawn. What's stopping the pawn from promoting is only the rook on h8, right? That's the only thing that's not allowing this pawn to promote. So what we can actually do is sacrifice the queen on h7. And this is more of a common idea than I think some people may realize. This basically either wins the rook or it forces the rook to take the queen, in which case we take with the pawn and promotion is unstoppable. We will not be trying to take the knight. We will be trying to promote on h8. That's a damn girl kind of move. It's cool. But at the same time, it results from the fact that black is so poorly developed here that he doesn't have the resources to stop the pawn even in a middle game. And as Will is thinking, I don't want to waste any time, so I will see if I can look up a game where I remember this clearly, who was playing in this game. It was a game in which I saw this technique applied. Let me see if I can spot this game. Yeah, Chimpanzee, you were the first person to spot this, I think. Okay. So 1 second, please. I'm looking to see if I can find this. All right. So he takes. Yeah, we're gonna take here. Yeah, it's not this game. I mean, I can find other instances of this. Thank you, Swagmus Prime. I'm gonna do a little bit of a search. Okay, so queen d4. That is a very good move. Thank you, Prank T. And you will see that this often happens after we win material. We have to actually defend now. We have to defend, and we have to defend very accurately because we have given up our queen, which means our homeland is under assault here, which means that we need to be super precise in how we defend this. Okay, So the obvious move is to promote the pawn. The obvious move is to promote the pawn. But first of all, let it be known, let the record reflect, we don't need to rush. He actually still can't stop us from promoting. So it might be worthwhile investing a tempo to defend the pawn on e4 before we promote. Let me think about this for a second. Yes. There's actually a super interesting line there. So let's go knight c3. You guys are awesome seeing this right off the bat. Remember that he can't castle. His king is already moved. And let's see. Well, let's see what he comes up with here. The thing is, if he plays rook to d8, he actually isn't threatening a check on d1. He's not threatening anything. Our pieces may look passive, but they are controlling all of the important squares. It's important not to panic in these situations. And it's also important to realize when you're not in a hurry. Sometimes you can afford a move like this. So, anyways. Okay. So I'm looking up some games, by the way, in this line. Okay, oh, I see a nice one. Okay. I have a game prepared for you guys to really hammer this idea home because it occurs in many different openings. Okay, knight b4. I saw this. That is what I was calculating. Will, by the way, playing super well. I have to give him a lot of kudos for the way he's defending this. Here's the thing. He's attacking c2. And it seems tempting to panic because we can't defend it. We actually cannot defend that pawn, but we don't need to. Because here's the thing. We can promote. And after he takes on c2, king e2, and he takes the rook, it is finally our turn to attack. And his king is basically now at the mercy of our queen and our rook. So what move are we going to have at the end of that line to essentially start an insurmountable attack? Because his pieces are scattered all over the board. The rook is not deployed. So that rook on a1 will sacrifice itself for the greater good. The move is, no, queen h6. Well, rook h6 is fine, but even simpler is to play rook to h7 in order to threaten queen g7. I don't think that can be stopped. I don't think that can be stopped. I mean, maybe Will shouldn't take on c2. I mean, that would be really impressive if he does something like rook d8 here. That would probably be the best defense. Because rook h7 right here doesn't work due to queen g1 check. We need to be careful. I don't think it's perpetual. I mean, because if he takes on c2 and goes knight a1, rook h7, he can give us one check on c4, but we can pretty easily, I think, sidestep that via h2. Well, if the knight doesn't take the rook, I don't see the perpetual. I mean, maybe I don't see the perpetual. Our king can always run this way if necessary, but I don't think that'll be necessary. Yeah, I don't think that's necessary. But let's see what Will comes up with. Okay, so he takes Beth Harmon. Thank you for the prime. Oh, we have several good moves here. If we think very deeply, we can actually see that the queens are in a standoff. So in addition to rook h7, we actually can play bishop takes f4 and then deploy our bishop to h6. So that also is, I think, pretty darn devastating. But let me just verify that there's no perpetual. So rook h7, c4, king h1, queen d4, king f1, queen d3, king g1, queen d4, king h2. Okay, there's no perpetual. Rook h7. Rook h7, and there's just no way to stop all of these threats. He can maybe prolong the game if he gives up the queen, but that's the best that black can do. This knight is out of the game. That's important. So this bishop on c1, again, is the unsung hero of this position. It is controlling the e3 square. It's controlling the e3 square, which means the queen cannot deliver a check there. That is important. Thank you, Beth. You too. Keep it up in Season 2. King's Gambit, man. That is the Beth Harmon kind of opening, gotta say. Gotta say. And the history of the King's Gambit will be even more interesting, perhaps, to you guys. No, I don't know. I'm just hinting that Season 2 would be nice. Okay, so he gives us a check. And now we zigzag our way out of the checks. We go king f2. Thank you, Doko, Doc Holiday DDS. Queen d4, and we zigzag our way to g1, and then, if necessary, to h2. That is another very good technique, by the way. When you are trying to escape the checks, a lot of people get overwhelmed. But what you need to do is you need to find a target square or a target area of the board to escape to. So the way that I see this is I'm like, okay, where do I want the king to end up? And I see, I can go to h2. I can seek cover behind the g2 pawn. It's easier if you already have a square in mind, and now all you need to do is you need to chart a course to that square. Queen d1 checked is not possible. The knight guards that. And I have several good illustrative examples. In queen endgames, you actually can apply that concept with particular effectiveness. You sometimes have to apply that concept. And I'll show you guys a very good illustrative game in that regard as well. And that's exactly what we do. We go king g1, and then if he gives us a check on d4, we can go to h1 or h2. I think there's plenty of meat for season 2. I think there's absolutely plenty. World Championship. Oh, and Will finds a nice defensive move. Queen g3. I actually didn't see that. That's beautiful. Okay. Which means we still have some work to do, guys. Okay, so let's unpack this move for a second. The idea behind Queen g3 is, first of all, he is threatening a perpetual. Second of all, he defends the g7 square. So we need to make a move that deals with both at the same time. We need to deal with this queen. We need to try to get that queen out of there. And we need to stop the perpetual. Now, when we stop a perpetual, we can stop it from either end. We do not have to defend this square. We can also defend this square. And we actually can do that with tempo. We can defend the g3 square. No, where are you guys going? Don't get the rook back to h3. Hey, this knight, it needs a job. It's I want to be involved. Yeah, let's make the knight involved. We don't want to get the rook out. The rook is a key attacker. If we go rook h3, then he goes queen g7, and the attack evaporates. So knight e2 is a key move. Attacks the queen. The queen has to stay on the g-file. And now we're going to use our minor pieces to tip the scales in our favor. The rook and the queen are keeping black down, keeping black paralyzed. It's the knight and the bishop that are going to be the ultimate finishers of the attack. They're going to be the pieces that overextend black, because black's queen is simply wearing too many hats. It has to protect too many squares. We're going to sack something on f4 and open the floodgates. Thank you, amen. Amin for the prime. Okay. Yes, a perpetual is a series of checks until the game ends in repetition, because you cannot evade the checks. Ultimately, perpetual check results in 3-time repetition, like if you don't accept a draw. That's the point. Okay. So hopefully this move makes sense, guys. And, okay, so now we have a very pretty win. So, you guys should all see that the bishop now pins the queen. So a sacrifice on f4 is quite natural. Now, the rationale behind it is that as soon as black takes his eyes off of the g7 square, this will be checkmate. Not immediately, but the king will move and we will take the knight, etc. So we need to find a way to get this queen out of g5. And the only pieces that we have left that are not fulfilling vital duties are the bishop and the knight. So we need to figure out what we want to sacrifice on f4. What do we want to sacrifice on f4? The bishop or the knight? I actually think both moves are fine, but I do think there is a more accurate way of doing this. So why do you guys want to sack the bishop? Have you thought about sacrificing both? So let's compare. Let's compare. Bishop takes f4, e takes f4, knight takes f4 has the benefit of threatening a fork on e6. But black can stop that fork by getting his rook to e8. Now let's look at the other option. Knight takes f4, ef4, bishop f4. Well, that attacks the queen directly. The queen has to stick on the g-file, and once the queen moves away from the g-file, a little bit of visualization practice for you guys. What move are we going to have to finish off the attack in that final position? That bishop on f4, bishops are generally great attackers. Bishop h6, of course, Beth Harmon finds it. She sees everything, is going to be absolutely crushing. It's going to force black to give away the queen. This is actually a really nice game. I'm glad Will is defending as well as he is, because this is really helping us showcase some key attacking techniques. So e takes f4, bishop takes f4, sacking the pieces on one square. I always like that. Okay. Well, Mikhail Liche, the rook will defend the e6 square. Yeah, this is a Beth Harmon style game for sure. E takes f4, bishop takes f4. Again, if queen takes f4, then queen g7. He can give a check on c5, Okay, queen g7. And now we still have to be careful. Do not put the queen on e7. That would be a Botez Gambit. That would not be checkmate. So what is the fastest checkmate? What should we do? It's a little bit of another zigzag method. Another kind of pretty little sequence, but very simple, right? We want to just take the knight, queen f8, and then that queen's going to maneuver to migrate to e6 and then to d7 to deliver the checkmate. Don't pre-move this move. He might go queen e7, but the game is over. Yes, queen e6. And guess what? Let's checkmate like this. You know, let's checkmate in style. Rook h8. The queen is pinned. Checkmating without taking the queen. Good game, Will. That was fantastic defense. It takes two to play a nice game, and Will, you certainly played extremely. You put your heart into it. I could tell. So nicely done. Awesome. And we have a lot to analyze too. Lots of cool details in this game. Okay, so our King's Gambit experiment turned out pretty darn well. Now, the King's Gambit has been around since the 16th century. The King's Gambit has been around essentially forever. Okay, literally as long as chess in Europe has been around, so is the King's Gambit. The first recorded game played in the King's Gambit was by Ruy Lopez. So Ruy Lopez did not only play the Ruy Lopez, he played in 1560 in Rome an Italian player named Giovanni da Cutri Leonardo, not Leonardo da Vinci. Although Leonardo da Vinci probably maybe played chess, I don't know. But he played a guy named da Cutri, I think it's pronounced. C in Italian is ch. Da Cutri, and Ruy Lopez absolutely demolished him in a Queen's Gambit. The game between Ruy Lopez and da Cutri continued as follows. Black in the game played d6. That's like an old-fashioned move, declining the King's Gambit. It's not a great move. Because it's really, really passive. Ruy Lopez played bishop c4, c6, knight f3, bishop g4, and black is already in big trouble. F takes c5, d takes c5, and what very typical tactical move did white now play? You can see that Ruy Lopez was quite good, actually. He wrote a book on chess, but Leonardo da Cutri was just not a very good player. Bishop f7, knight e5. I think we'll forgive him. He lived in the 1500s. Queen takes g4. And now queen e6. White to play and win the game in the fastest way. Ruy Lopez played a perfect game. I think he was cheating. I think Ruy Lopez might have been cheating, guys, to be honest. He might have been using Stockfish 0.0001. Queen c8, queen d8, queen takes d8, king takes d8, and knight f7, knight takes h8. So he is notorious. He got banned. Yeah. He absolutely got banned. So he was using Houdini, exactly. So that's the game between Ruy Lopez and Leonardo. That was the first ever recorded game featuring the King's Gambit. What's impressive about this, by the way, is that f4 is not an intuitive move. Let's get something very straight. The intuitive move here is knight f3. f4 actually weakens white's king. It took some cojones to play a move like this. And the fact that a lot of these early players were willing to do that is squarely to their credit. We shouldn't take that for granted. Then it was played in 1590 by an Italian player named Giulio Polerio. And Polerio also crushed his opponent, a guy named Busnardo. And then the famous Gioacchino Greco, a player who I've mentioned several times. He was an Italian living in the early 17th century, in the 1600s. And he actually formalized some of the analysis of the King's Gambit. He did a lot of work on it. And then the King's Gambit was wildly popular. As you guys know, Morphy's Day in the 1800s, everybody was playing it. It was all the rage. It was, for a time, more popular than any other opening. And then, slowly but surely, Italian, Ruy Lopez, the Scotch, all of those openings started becoming more popular. The King's Gambit really fell out of favor probably in the first half of the 1900s. People started realizing that black had many ways to play against it. And if black was very precise, then white would be the one struggling for equality. And then when computers came around, what should be pointed out, the King's Gambit has not, I repeat it, has not been refuted. Black is not winning. Black does not have a big advantage, but I believe that black has several ways to get, let's just say, a very comfortable position. And more importantly, black has several ways to take the sting out of the King's Gambit. If white still got an attacking position, people would be okay with it. But black has ways to play against it that really takes the fun out of it. That's the reason it fell out of favor. Okay, so finally, hope you guys enjoyed that little history. E takes f4, knight f3. D6 is one of the possible moves here for sure. Let me check on its popularity. So D6 is the second most popular move. And now I played D4 and G5, of course. You have to keep the pawn, otherwise this doesn't make any sense. And the move bishop C4 is actually rare. Yes, you guys are correct. H4 is the main line here. H4, and this is actually a sacrifice line. H4, G4, knight G5. And you might look at this and say, well, wait a second. Actually, no, knight G1, knight G1. Knight G5 is possible. Morozevich played knight G5. Knight G5 is interesting, but probably unsound. But the move is actually knight back to G1. The whole point is that you've softened up the f4 pawn to such a degree that you can undevelop your knight. If you take this pawn, then it all is justified in the end. But I was out of book. I decided to play a pretty natural move, bishop c4. And according to the computer, no, there's nothing particularly wrong with this move. Now, if black had played g4, I fully intended to sacrifice the knight and castle. And this is a kind of a variety of what's called Muzio's Gambit. I think the actual Muzio Gambit is in a slightly different version, but the spirit of the Gambit is kept sound because you can see how many pieces white has developed and how weak black's king is. I think from a practical perspective, if black doesn't know the theory, this is very hard to play against, okay? So the Muzio Gambit was what I intended, but bishop e6 is the first, I think, serious mistake. Takes and h4. So I don't know what black should have done here. I mean, if you go g4, then this is just a disaster. I think bishop h6 is not terrible. Maybe g takes h4 is the lesser evil, and then try to plug this diagonal somehow. But let's fast forward to the interesting bit. So h takes g5, e5, d takes e5. Why was this move necessary? Because if we go g6 immediately, then queen takes e5 is not a threat. So we take and we go g6. And here I think queen f6 was the best move. I think queen f6 was the best move. And the reason is because queen takes h7 does not work anymore. Why is this not winning for white? What nice defensive resource does black now have? Okay, now Scholar's Mate does not appear at high levels. Yes, knight h6 is one option. A slightly inferior option is also to put the queen behind the pawn. Here you at least give up a knight, but knight h6, very nice. That is the best move, because you also keep your knight, and then you can come around and take the pawn of the king. Okay, so knight c6, and now queen takes h7. This is a very typical, as I explained, technique in many types of positions. More so than you guys might realize across a wide variety of openings. And I pulled up one nice game to show you, one little game segment to just very quickly demonstrate that. So, game from 1996, Hendricks is an IM. And in this position, in a Najdorf, completely different opening, but a very similar concept. White to play and crush. Very nice move in this position that white ended up playing. And it's yeah, g6 is right. So g6 is a very pretty move. If f takes g6, then you drop this pawn, and that's a disaster in relation to black's king. You cannot play h takes g6 because the rook is hanging. So black plays f5, and now, of course, you guys should all see the move. Mad Max 4551, thanks for the 3 a.m. hype. Tier 1 sub. Black to play and win. And queen takes h7, and black resigned. Amazing. Here black just literally loses the rook. You can't leave it on h8. And here the game is over with a single pawn. Unstoppable by all of black's pieces, all of which are on the queen side. And black resigned in this position. So you can see that it's, yeah, this guy got cheesed by queen takes h7. And this is one of thousands of games in which this concept was applied. But hopefully it brings it to life a little bit. And so we do the same thing here. Queen h7, gh7. But now, Will, I have to compliment you. You found a lot of really good moves. Queen d4 is the best option. Now knight c3. Knight c3 defends the pawn. And now knight b4, h8 queen. And what really curses black is the fact that none of these squares are accessible. Like, black just cannot get his pieces to any important squares. I'm somehow just like defending everything, and that's kind of bad luck because I'm pretty undeveloped. But it just so happens that that the pieces are defended. Thank you, Nitrus, for the prime and the 5 months. And so King E2, Knight A1 is the best you can do. And now Rook H7. And here I honestly thought the game was over. I did not see this move. This move, Queen G3, is very, very strong, right? It defends G7 and it threatens perpetual. So Knight E2 is the key move. I think without Knight E2, it will not be easy to win. Now, Knight E2, and now Knight takes F4. So just to recap, if Bishop takes F4, then Rook E8, and I think White is still winning, but it's not that simple. It's not that simple, but Knight F4 is absolutely crushing because of Bishop H6, and then Queen E5 with checkmate and just a couple moves. Queen C7 and Queen D7 is elementary, my dear Watson, and so Queen takes F4 is basically forced. Queen G7 and of course Queen takes G8, Queen E6, and Queen E7. So that was a really nice game. Probably pretty high accuracy. And again, it takes 2 to tango. So that was a fantastic defensive effort by Will Forget This. To recap, I think Bishop E6 was a big mistake. Number one, this really made it hard to defend. And maybe in this position, I think after G takes H4, you can more or less survive. And then finally, I would say Queen F6 in this position would force G takes H7. Sorry, in this position would force G takes H7, although in a position like this, because of this very monstrous pawn, I mean, Black is in very, very big trouble. So I think that this is, I just don't think this is good at all. Okay. So any questions about this game? Could you explain your other move where you could have used the bishop instead of doing H7? Well, yeah, sure. So I'm not sure where you mean. Oh, Rook H7. Okay, so I could have done this. Bishop takes F4 was also possible, I believe. Because if E takes F4, then the queens are at a standoff. But the reason I rejected this, Black has this check on C4. And then he actually can take the bishop. This is still winning with something like this, but I'm pretty sure that my option was a little bit crisper. So let me check. Were there any big mistakes in this game from my end? I'm just checking really quickly. Thanks again, everybody, for the tremendous support. As I check, I just wanted to say once again how much I appreciate everybody being engaged and those people who sub and support me so selflessly are never taken for granted, and I keeps me going, and I really appreciate it. So thank you guys. This was a really nice game.